All right, goalies, welcome back to another episode of the DIY Goalie Podcast. We have Brad Wall with us today from Human Integrated Performance in Edmonton. He is a former goalie, so we can all accept him into our ranks. He is now a sports psychologist, and he works with doing cognitive and vision training stuff as well as some of the mental side of things. So we kind of wanted to touch base with him. How are you doing today, Brad?
Doing well. Thank you for having me on here. Excited to give this a go.
Uh,
So
yeah, we won't put too much pressure on you. So
I appreciate that.
yeah, why don't you kind of give us a little bit of a background on yourself, kind of where you played and how you transitioned into doing what you do today.
For sure. Yeah. So I'm grew up in Grand Prairie, Alberta, north of Edmonton here. So that's where I played most of my hockey. I think I started goaltending when I was about 6 years old, and as soon as I threw the pads on for the first time and got that
You get hooked.
experience, yeah, it was game
Yeah,
over. And
yeah.
not gonna lie, the parents weren't overly thrilled, but the rest is history. So
Sounds like
um,
every story.
I think so. It's
Yeah.
all pretty similar. So, and then yeah, so like I said, I spent most of my hockey was actually in Grand Prairie competitively, anyways. My first years in Bantam was Double A, affiliated with Triple A. Same thing with midget, and then I played up to junior level. Played for the Grand Prairie Wheelers, their junior B, and it's kind of along that path I got introduced to sports psychology. Just with myself, I ended up linking up with a sports psychologist and uh, ended up helping my game tremendously. And I found it very interesting and intriguing. So I kind of pursued that path on my own.
Yeah.
And yeah, so and that path kind of brought me to Edmonton, pursuing the education, of course, and all that. And along the way, got to connect with a lot of cool individuals, people in the field. And so and that's kind of how I landed my mentor, Nicholas Allen. He's another sports psychologist in Edmonton. So he's been kind of showing me the ropes ever since and gotten me to this point now. So
That's good. Yeah, I think it's definitely good that there's more of a shift towards the use of sports psychologists and just kind of you know taking better care of our mental game nowadays because I think especially in the position of goaltending, that's what they say 80% of the game's mental, which you could probably
for
argue
sure.
the actual percentage of it, but
Yeah,
definitely a huge portion of it. So
for sure.
getting into it then, so how does our mental focus, our sharpness, all those tools that we kind of use for our mental state of mind when we're in the game and even outside of the game, how does that affect how we perform?
Well, when we're looking at it's not much different than when we're talking about the psychology or the mental aspects behind it all. The foundation is very similar, whether we're talking about sports psychology or just general psychology. And the purpose of tools is something we can lean on, we can utilize to help us, whether it's refocus, shake off a bad goal, um, get rid of some of that negative self-talk that we've all experienced at one point or another, right? So,
Yeah.
but like everything else in life, if we learn how to use a tool once and we leave it at that and think, okay, this is going to be the solution, right? Nothing really good is going to come of that. So the most important thing with any tool, anything we learn, any strategy, any goals we set is consistency in practice, right? So we could give you 50 different tools to have in your toolbox, but if you're not using them consistently and practicing, right, when we need them, it's going to be no use to us. So that consistency is probably one of the biggest pieces with all these tools when we're talking about mental strategies and the mental tools of the game and allowing us to perform to the best of our ability. You know, that
Yeah.
concept of practice, practice, practice,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I'm sure we've all been sick of hearing that from our parents and
No, for sure.
coaches at some point. But yeah, it's very true. So, what are some of those things then that we can be practicing consistently those tools that can kind of help us get into that right state of mind?
Well, I'll just kind of I'll start at the kind of the chapter one, I like to call it. So in the work I do with athletes, I do have a bit of a structure and things that some important key items that I like to just check in on and make sure I can check those off. But if we look at the starting at the foundation of everything, so there's two really key aspects when it comes to mental performance, and not only mental but physical as well, but diet and sleep. So those are always two factors that I'm going to be checking in on, specifically the sleep. Most athletes that I do see, they're invested in the sport, they're invested in what they're doing, they're trying to grow, get better. So usually their diets, not bad for the most part, and obviously they're active and exercising. So the main one is the sleep, and the big things I like to look at with that is routines. So do we have like a wind down routine at the end of the day that's consistent? And again, going back to the consistency, right? So that's one factor I always like to look at is sleep, making sure we're getting the rest, we can recharge, so we are fresh, we're able to focus. Um, Other tools, moving on from that, another huge factor is creating awareness within ourselves. And the awareness piece, it allows us to see our strengths, understand our weaknesses, and by doing so, it allows us to grow and utilize the tools that we're given in the proper way, so we can actually make use of them.
Yeah.
So those are just two more or less concepts that I like to look at and really try to hone in on and ingrain in the athletes I do work with. And then outside of that, simple things like goal setting, making sure we know how to set goals properly so that we're able to achieve them. Relaxation strategies, proper breathing techniques, mindfulness, grounding exercises, little things like that, things that help us manage stress, stay calm, collect, um, and help us to regulate our own emotions and not get too activated when we're on the ice.
Yeah, for
So
sure. That solid even keel
yes,
that we're
exactly.
looking for.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. No, sleep's for sure very important. I'm actually at some point going to have a whole episode on sleep, so we won't dive too much into that. But what maybe want to kind of start with is that awareness. So,
Sure.
how can we, I guess, be more aware of what we need to improve on, and also kind of our triggers too, like when we're going down a path that we maybe need to reset our course, whether it's emotionally or mentally or anything like that. How can we build that awareness?
Right. Yeah, and there's a few different ways we can go about this. So when we're talking about awareness as a general concept, it can be broken down into like different factors. And so, for example, our like I said, our awareness of our strengths and our weaknesses, our skill set essentially, because not everyone's going to have the same skill set, right? There's going to
Yeah.
be bigger goalies, smaller goalies, goalies that are quicker, different styles, right? All in between. So that's one really important way is just being able to look at ourselves. And there's something called self actualization. And what that refers to is understanding how we can be the best version of ourselves that we can be. We're not comparing to the next person beside us, but we're looking at ourselves, right? So that for that reason alone, that's why that awareness piece is so critical. So that
Yeah.
we can focus on our own skill set and build off that to make us the best athlete and uh, player we can be,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And some other ways then when we're talking about awareness. So if we're talking about awareness of like during a hockey game or something that I always like to encourage is just general like tracking or journaling. So pre-game reflections, post-game reflections, make sure we have a notebook. We're tracking everything. What did I do good this game? What did I do? What could I improve on? I find that's probably the most simple, most effective way that we can actually build our awareness is doing simple exercises like that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's good. And then, so we kind of talked about that even keel, that awareness. So, because a lot of times we've all been there, we're in the middle of a game, something goes wrong, and we can just tell, right? Things are
Right.
maybe snowballing a bit, going off the rails. So, um, what are some of the things like for those short term situations where it's like in the moment, in the game, how we can kind of be aware of, where we're at mentally and kind of, you know, recourse, or I guess reset ourselves onto the proper course.
Right. Yeah, and again, something a consistent theme that tends to pop up is that routine. So something that I always encourage goaltenders, especially, is to have a reset routine. So whether it's let a goal in, trying to shake it off. So having a reset routine that's consistent every time, something that we can do just to shift our focus. Because a lot of times, what the challenge is we get in our own head, right?
Yeah.
And if we think about it, when we're playing a hockey game, there's something I like to use called the focus flashlight, and the light beam represents our focus. And so when we're in a game, it's an analogy I like to use, but I like my athletes to visualize or imagine they have a flashlight kind of planted on their forehead,
Yeah.
and that light beam represents their focus. And so an easy check-in I get my athletes to do that I work with is just ask yourself, okay, where's my flashlight? And a lot of the times when we do that, our flashlights, it's a 180 and it's actually like the light beam's pointing towards us in our own head,
Yeah.
right? So a simple check-in like that can start the process just by understanding, okay, where's my focus right now? Am I in my own head? Is it where it needs to be? Okay, what can I do about that then, right? And so I guess the one of the exercises I resort to a lot for this is something called the five senses. And I'm not sure if you've heard this, Nathan, before, but a lot of people, it's about 50-50 who have heard it and who hasn't, but
Yeah.
it's a good exercise because it utilizes our five senses: sense of sight, uh, touch, sound, smell, and taste, and it allows us to bring ourselves into the present moment.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I find
And that's just basically identifying one thing from each sense, right? Into your current environment to be a little bit more aware of what's around.
exactly, yeah,
Yeah.
just and when we're doing that, we want to try to be really specific. So, we're not just identifying, oh, I can see the boards, and
Yeah.
you want to try to be specific with it. Really try to use those five senses because that's what actually holds the power in these tools and exercises, right? So that's it's a simple one to reground. I like to encourage people to incorporate that into that reset routine. Whether it's have a drink of water, skate to the boards. Everyone has their own style and touch to it, right? But there's a couple key things if we can incorporate into those reset routines that make a big difference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So then, um, because we're going to touch on some of the things for some longer term stuff, but because I know you mentioned the routines and then with the five senses and stuff like that. So because me personally, when I talk to my goalies about setting themselves up with their pregame routine, a lot of what I talk about is the visualization and the positive self talk. Um,
Right.
so how can we, I guess, take kind of that concept of the five senses? Because when I talk to them about visualization, I tell them to, use as much as you can in your imagination to bring your senses into it, the smell of your gear and all that gross
Right.
stuff.
Yeah.
So, how can we, I guess, use those in other aspects to make some of these other tools a little bit more effective outside of just the reset routine?
Right. Well, I like what you're saying there, like with the visualization specifically. that's that's always one tool or exercise where that those five senses are super important,
Yeah.
right? And like you said, really trying to get the goalies or the athletes to really immerse themselves in that experience, right? That
Yeah.
visualization process. And what the research shows with that is, again, the more specific we can be and the more senses we can incorporate into that practice, that the more benefit we're going to have with it, right? If we're not doing it to that full extent, it's not really going to have a huge huge positive effect,
Yeah. Okay.
right? So that'd be
So,
one area.
yeah. So, building off of that, then what are some other things that you think are pretty important to be looking at incorporating when it comes to pregame routines? just
Right.
based off of getting into that right state of mind. I know a lot of it is going to be personal, what works and what doesn't. But what are some of the
Right.
things, like one of the play or some of the places to start, anyways?
Yeah. Well, and like you said, right, everyone's going to have their own fit with what
Yeah,
works, right? But again, there's always going to be some consistent things, and depending on the person. So something I always like to look at too, again, is just the simple tool of like breathing exercises, and depending on what we need getting to get ready and getting that focus in the zone before a game. Some people like to get a little bit amped up, and some people like to stay calm and collect, and that'll vary from person to person. But I find with the breathing specifically, even just going through that act, and because we're having to focus on kind of the structure of the breathing exercises, there's one specifically that I do, the box breathing, with 4 seconds in, hold four, four out, hold four. So I find before a game, especially because you're having to focus on the structure, you're not really allowing yourself to focus on the worries, the concerns. You might, and you acknowledge them, and then you try to get that focus back to the exercise on hand, right? So I find that to be a really good one that I would encourage, all goalies to incorporate in terms of just getting getting focused, getting ready, um, feeling calm and collect, like even keel, like we're talking about, right?
yeah,
And then the five senses, the visualization, those are all other things that I'd really encourage. But something even more so simplistic than that is just standard, wall ball drills, warming up the brain, warming up that cognitive processing, the tracking, all that stuff, right? That's gonna be super,
yeah.
super important as well.
Yeah, that was key to my routine. I'd get my lower half on, I'd find a wall and just bounce one tennis ball. I didn't like the three ball juggling. I just like to
Fair
track
enough.
track one ball while I listen to
Yeah,
music, and
yeah.
that was it. Get the eyes going. But
No, exactly right. And it's another
yeah,
example of, what works for one
yeah,
might not work for the others. So
yeah, exactly. So
yeah.
Um, building off of that, then, so we've kind of talked about the short term in the game a little bit, before the game, but what are some of the things we can do to kind of address when we're talking more of a long term funk or a slump? How can we kind of reset from that and bring ourselves out and get into the right state of mind? Because I know we've all been there. By the time you get to a game, you've had a few rough games. It's like, not looking forward to this. I'm basically already let in 5 goals and I haven't even stepped on the ice yet. So,
Exactly. Yeah.
so
You
how
just
can
feel
we,
that defeat, right? And
yeah. So how can we kind
it's
of get ourselves out of that when it's more longer term?
right. And it's always a tough one, right? Even from my seat, trying to help. But so for those kind of instances when we're experiencing, um, those longer durations, and in that funk, in the ruts, not playing well, a lot of times what I end up turning to there is more of like it's cognitive behavioral therapy. It's a style of therapy where we're focused more so on our thought processes and how those are influencing our actions, behaviors, and confidence and self-esteem, and stuff like that, right? So a lot of times when we're in the funk, one bad game happens, usually we can probably shake that off. But when they start to compile, right, we got 5 games in a row, and it's like, holy crap, what the heck's wrong with me? you know we really
Yeah.
start to question ourselves and our ability. And so that's where that, more of the actual psychology comes into play. Really working on reframing, reshaping thoughts, focus a lot of that self talk piece, trying to eliminate the negative, get more of that positive self talk. And it's important to note too that this stuff doesn't just happen overnight. But again, going back to that
Yeah.
practice,
The
practice, practice, right?
consistency. Yeah.
Yeah, consistency with it. So there are some specific tools and stuff that I'll give clients for that, but a lot of that work actually happens in the sessions and the one-on-one time, and
Yeah.
really diving into the thought process and working to eliminate some of those maladaptive ones.
Yeah. So with that positive self-talk then, for maybe somebody who's, kind of new to this, they've started, the awareness process where they identified that, they might have an issue or want to start making some changes, where do we start when it comes to that positive self-talk?
Right. Well, a lot of times, what I do see with the negative self talk, we'll kind of just go back to that for a second. But
Yeah.
the negative self talk, a lot of it comes from emotions instead of facts, right? So,
Yeah.
what we want to do, we want to try look at the evidence. Can we find evidence to support the crappy self talk that we're giving ourselves or the negative thoughts? Is there evidence to support that? And yeah, we might be able to make it a bit of a stretch and find something that we can kind of weasel in there to make fit. But more often than not, there isn't going to be a lot of evidence to back up those maladaptive thoughts that we're having, right? So, um, one thing I like to a practice I like to do is just get them to actually write out a list. Okay, positive things about my game, positive skills I possess, positive things I bring to the ice when I'm out there playing, negative things, list goes on. Usually there's, it's a, might be a 10 to 2 kind of list for positive and negatives, right?
Yeah.
And even the act and process of doing that really is eye opening because it allows us to see that this negative that we're focused on really isn't as big as we make it out to be.
Yeah.
Right. So looking for that evidence for the positives, and usually we can make a little bit those matches easier. And then with that, there's a rule of thumb for every negative thought that we have. It usually takes around 3 positive thoughts to counteract that.
Yeah.
Right. So a lot of that will just be, again, the practice, the consistency, and putting the rubber to the road in terms of trying to actually shift our perceptions, see ourselves in a positive light. And if all of that, if all of that isn't proving to be what we need, then a really simple thing we can go back to is just goal setting.
Yeah.
So when we set goals and we achieve goals, we get that spark of confidence. It feels good,
Yeah.
right? And so at the very least, if we're in a funk, we need to find something that we can do to get some positivity and something that's going to just start to kind of grab the rope and climb out, right?
Yeah, and to build off that too, because I'm more from the on ice perspective. But one thing
Right.
that's really good for that too, guys, is to really make sure that you guys are just focusing on the fundamentals when it comes to on the ice. So tracking, save execution, positioning, skating, keep it simple and just get
For
back to the
sure.
basics, build up some confidence like you're talking about and go from there because that can go a long way too.
Oh,
Um,
100%. Yeah.
is there anything else that you think can kind of help us to improve our confidence, get a little bit of that swagger going for when we do step out for a game?
Yeah, I think, going back to even some of the visualization practices, the self talk, all of that, the more we do it and the more we can do multiple things together, the better the chance of getting some of that confidence back and being ready to go hit the ice. But kind of like you were saying, right? At the end of the day, if we can fall back on the basics that we know we have, that skill set, we know, like, we can all stop a puck for the most part, right? If we're a goaltender playing somewhat competitively, or
Yeah.
even if we're just starting, right? We all have that ability to stop the puck, right? So even just going back to that, going back to the basics, like you had mentioned there, and um,
It's like
sorry, I
every no
lost my
worries.
train
It's
of thought there.
like every minor hockey coach out there, just stop the puck.
Yeah, and another thing that I find helpful too is at the end of the day, when we're in a funk or we're thinking too many negative things, or there's too much pressure, are we really having fun when we're out there,
Yeah.
right? So just getting them to reflect on, like, why are they out there in the first place? Why are we out there playing? Why are we throwing the
Yeah.
pads on? What do you love about being a goalie?
Yeah,
I always
exactly.
get, well, I love the glove saves, right? Well, okay, let's visualize some glove saves. Let's have some fun with it.
Yeah. Just from my perspective, no windmills. I'm gonna be the buzzkill because
Yeah,
those
no, I
are
know, man.
those are a
Everyone
40%.
wants it, but they're so inefficient and
Yeah, I know. I'll be the buzzkill. Everyone can throw their drinks at me.
no,
So
that's Someone's got to do it, right?
Yeah, exactly. So shifting focus a little bit then. So because a lot of what happens on the ice relates to our cognitive function and kind of how we can process information around us. And that's kind of one thing we talk a lot about on the show and just in general, about how we can improve our game. So, how does that cognitive function also kind of translate to the mental side of things, and how that can help us to improve on that side as well?
Right. Well, that cognitive function or cognitive processing is essentially the key to it all, right? So everything that we're seeing is going through that processing loop, that visual processing to the cognitive processing, and then we're reacting. So simply put, it's huge. It's a huge factor, right,
Yeah.
of performance. But what I see and what I tend to find is when you're actually put the time into work specifically on that cognitive functioning, whether that's the reaction time or the tracking or um, whatever it may be, when we're working on it, essentially what we're doing, we're making our brain function at a more optimal, efficient level, right? And the more efficient we can process information and handle different multiple stimuli at once, the easier it is to stay focused on the target, easier it is to react the way we need to, um, it, and also manage stress. So I'm not sure if we're going to have some time to talk about some of the Dynavision training that I do here, but uh, I just want to know one thing because that's a huge part of that cognitive training that we do is that Dynavision visual motor training. But aside from the reaction time and the processing, one of the biggest benefits I see with that Dynavision training is um, the the work that it does to help us understand our stress response and how to control that stress response. Because when we're on the board and we're going through a run, it is stressful. I tend to see people get really tense, get really stressed, stop breathing. They're not blinking. They're
Yeah.
just kind of like, and so it's a good picture when I see goalies on there. Like, so what's happening when you're on the ice and you're feeling stressed, right? So the more we can work with the cognitive side of things and that mental side of things, it's simply put, it's going to have a benefit on almost all areas.
Yeah. Well, and aside from the physical processing too, I imagine that the improved cognitive function also helps us kind of process our emotions and our thoughts a little bit quicker too.
Yeah,
Um, so that's, you know, you'll hear it. You've heard it before. You'll hear it today. You'll hear it lots more. But work on that cognitive function, guys. Work on that
right,
processing and train that brain. Um,
right.
so, how does that also, I guess, relate to how we process things visually? Like, what's the correlation between, the vision and the cognitive training that you kind of do aside from the psychological side of things?
Right. And so for that question, I think the biggest thing with the cognitive training that we do is it decreases the amount of time or that gap that it takes to actually take in the stimuli, see the stimuli, process it, and then react to it.
Yeah.
So, connection with the visual processing, with the cognitive processing, is that efficiency piece I was talking about, and decreasing that amount of time that loop takes. And when we do that, all of a sudden, um, I guess one way to think about it, one way I frame it is, you have someone taking a shot from the blue line. And if someone's just winding up from the blue line, no traffic in front of us, odds are we're going to see it, we're going to track it, we have a good chance of making the save, right? But all of a sudden we got some traffic in front of us, and now there's a deflection, and we all know that feeling where we just miss it and it's in the net, and defeat, right? But with the visual processing and that cognitive processing, it's giving us that extra chance or extra ability to make that save off a deflection because we're able to pick it up quicker and react a little bit faster, if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Basically just, you know, goes from the initial information pickup to the final movement of the body a little quicker. So
Right.
yeah, no, that's good. Um, so in that case, then, like, what are some of the things that we can do, like exercises, activities, all of that stuff, to basically help us improve our cognitive processing, our vision, and kind of our visual processing? Like, what are some of the things we can do to be improving that?
Right. And there's a a plethora of different exercises and tools, but some a little bit harder to come by than others. Like for example, I was talking about our Dynavision tool here. So um, I don't know how many are in Edmonton at this point in time, but I know there was 3 or 4 in the city, and we had one of them. So something that's always been pretty unique to our clinic and the work we do is that Dynavision tool. But like I said, not everyone has access or the ability to come in and use it
Yeah,
consistently, right? So a couple key items that I resort to when it comes to the cognitive side of it. Something as simple as concentration grids.
yeah,
Yeah, I see. Figured you'd have done those a time or two yourself. But,
yeah,
definitely been around, right? But um, at the end of the day, it's a very simplistic exercise that has a lot of benefit for it. With the processing, the focus, concentration, and even just with our visual processing as well. So
yeah,
concentration grid is always a go-to. Again, simple tennis ball drills, wall ball stuff. It's going to be working on our tracking, reaction time, and I know you mentioned you're kind of a one ball guy, but something I do encourage is the juggling, right?
yeah,
Getting some of that going because again, there's some research that shows that the act of juggling actually helps to um, not necessarily build new gray matter, but help with the connections in our gray matter in our brain.
yeah,
So again, more of that efficiency and
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
for sure. And I know there's the argument too that when you've got multiple balls that you're juggling, it's kind of like being able to process multiple players on the ice in front of you as well as the puck and all of that stuff.
right.
So um one thing I wanted to go back to, because we talked a bit about the routines, and I just kind of thought about it, but how do you, I guess, differentiate between a routine that is repeatable as opposed to superstitious? Because I know at
Mm,
once we toe that line, we can potentially get ourselves into trouble if we have a routine that's a little bit superstitious and maybe something comes up that we can't do a portion of that routine. So I
right.
guess two parts to that. Like, what's the line there? And how can we deal with a portion of our routine kind of getting thrown off?
Right. Well, I will say in the work that I do, like early on when we're establishing these routines or talking about routines, if there's a routine in place, I'm already evaluating and I'm assessing it. It sounds bad, but I'm kind of judging the routine to
Yeah.
see how effective it is, right? And
Yeah.
how, um, are we able to replicate it time and time again? And even if there is some superstition in there, like I've had guys that I got to put my left skate on first, right skate on after, stuff like that, right? Most of the time, that stuff's pretty minor and stuff that we can keep consistent. But, when we're talking about things that are a little bit more out there, I need this specific smoothie before I go on the ice or something, and you might not be able to get like stuff like that, right? So,
Yeah.
and to some people, that could be detrimental.
Yeah.
But what I find is, um, trying to get them away from that a little bit by resorting back to some of that cognitive behavioral therapy, just to challenge some of those beliefs with the superstition. And I'm not going to do everything, but like I said, if there's something that seems a little bit out there that could cause some problems,
Yeah.
I might challenge them on that a little bit and try to get them to see different perspectives on it. But at the end of the day, when it comes to the routine, what I'm focused on is things that are going to be, available to us, things that we can repeat, replicate, keep that consistency.
Yeah.
I know it's kind of a wash around answer on that because it's a bit tough when you're dealing with those superstitions. But like I said,
Yeah.
when it gets to that point, I'll be challenging a little bit of their beliefs on that.
Yeah,
Just to see.
I had a goalie partner who had to tap his post before every face off a certain way, a certain number of times. And there was one time they dropped the puck before he was done and he got scored on. So, you
Oh
know,
no, okay, yeah,
that's, yeah, that's kind of, I never really got that far. So that's good. But I know there's some goalies out there that, it has to be
yeah,
to the T every time. So, um,
yeah.
but yeah,
And myself, I was never really like that, so it is a bit of uncharted territory for me. But
yeah,
I can understand
yeah,
the significance of it, but it is hard to break.
yeah, for sure. So, what do you have for us as kind of a one tip to give to our goalies to help them, I guess, improve their game?
One tip, I think, if we kind of have a big look at everything, right, that we can do, I think the one thing that I would say that's probably going to provide the most benefit, um, in the least amount of time with the least bumps in the road, is getting really, really good at goal setting and understanding what you're working towards. So having that awareness and setting goals based on that. So everyone can set goals, but it's amazing how many people come in here with goals, and we start going through them, and they're not set up in a way that's going to create success,
Yeah,
right? So I think goal setting day in day out, small goals, we all have that kind of big thing that we're working towards, but all too often I see people miss those middle steps.
yeah,
So I think if I was to leave with one piece, I would say that just get really good, really efficient at setting goals, doing them properly. Use that SMART goal model, and you know whether it's related to gameplay or related to the mental side of the game, there's always going to be a benefit for some of that goal setting. Whether it's for confidence, like I said, achieving goals, it feels good. It's going to give us that little spark and keep us moving forward.
yeah.
So
So, would you suggest then basically starting at your desired endpoint and working backwards to break that up into kind of stepping stones? Then is that kind of
yeah, yeah,
okay?
I think we have to identify the main goal, right?
Yeah,
And like you said, so we identify the major goal and then we break that down. So usually what happens, we might call it like an annual goal, a goal for the end of the season. We're going to break that down into quarters. We're going to break that down into weeks.
yeah,
So every week we need to focus on this to achieve that quarterly goal. Every quarterly goal is going to lead to that big goal.
yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. No, that's awesome. Yeah. So, where can people find you or reach out to you if they kind of want to learn more or get in touch with you to maybe work with you and all of that good stuff?
Yeah. So as you mentioned, we have a clinic in Edmonton called Human Integrated Performance. We're close to the downtown area, so it's 142nd Street and Stony Plain Road. We're in that West Block, Glenora area.
Yeah,
Um, and then we also have you can, if you want any more information about the clinic, about the work that we do, the work that I do, you can always check out the website humanintegratedperformance.com, and that'll have all the information to connect with us. If you have any further questions, you can either get in touch with me personally through email or give the clinic a call, stuff like that. So
yeah, awesome. Well, we appreciate you coming on and kind of sharing your insight with us, and thanks for stopping by.
yeah, thank you for having me. Like I said, it was excited to be here, and cool opportunity. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries. All right, take care.
Okay, you as well.